Welcome, welcome very, very much to Conversations. A great personal honor to welcome to the program Peter Joseph, and he is the creator, we're going to get into that in detail, of a major filmic experience that's been millions of views on the internet called
the Zeitgeist film series.
The Zeitgeist film series, yes, I know. I was watching the whole thing last night. It was very well done, and I congratulate you very much on that. And he's also a scholar, and particularly associated with the Zeitgeist Movement, which is a major movement around the world that has great implications. And Peter, welcome so much to Conversation.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Harold. You've been a beacon of communication for a generation now, and you've brought
generations. I go back generations.
I would say so. I have to congratulate you on giving voice to people that otherwise wouldn't have had it, I think, if you weren't around to give some experimental thoughts some time on the air.
Well, so. Yeah, I would, because it's public. I believe in public. I got a little badge. It's public access. I believe in public access because of, we could go into it in unique position in terms of giving voice to a lot of people who would not otherwise have a voice in multimedia.
Yeah,
but that's my thing. And what you're doing is, God, the film, I watched it all last night and took it all in and everything, and I congratulate you enormously on it.
Thank you.
Having said that, I wonder if we could. We met for the first time today. I hope it's the beginning of a friendship that will endure.
Right.
And maybe you could share your own background.
Sure.
Born and raised, a little of your education, and then let's talk about the Zeitgeist Movement and the Zeitgeist film and your work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was born and raised in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And my family was nothing, my family's brilliant, of course, but their backgrounds were not necessarily in the arts. They were actually civil servants for the most part, and it was kind of, I'd say, an average middle-class upbringing, even though my parents are actually very open-minded, and I give them a lot of credit for myself being exposed to a lot of ideas that otherwise I wouldn't have. For example, I was very fortunate to go to an art school at the age of 13. I went to I basically started college at the age of 13 as a musician. So I was submerged in adults, essentially.
You were a musician at 13?
Yes, I am a musician today.
I'm you are? I didn't know that.
So basically I was pursuing percussion. So I'm a percussionist. That was my trade back before I started to do more activism and filmmaking. But making a living at percussion was very difficult.
Yeah,
so long
the
story,
arts are hard.
It is. So I moved from North Carolina to New York to go to school, to go to college. I submerged myself in debt, which of course is unfortunately in America everyone seems to do. Oh, the college debt is such a burden on people.
What a burden on their back when they came out.
And I often joke in my kind of criticism of the business culture in corporate America is what a better thing to do than have ripe, broke kids to enter into the business establishment so they can be exploited. But that's, you know,
like serfs on a feudal estate.
Exactly, the peasants. But so I dropped out.
But the family was warm and welcoming, and it was warm and encouraging and all
always
that sort
encouraging.
of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's really important.
I think absolutely.
You said they were brilliant.
Oh, in their own ways. Absolutely. Yeah. They, I mean,
intellectually curious.
Of course.
Stimulating.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. So North Carolina to New York, I drop out, and I had to make living doing something a little more substantial, because I was more of an experimental percussionist. I followed the music of people like Enos Xenakis and Elliot Carter and Oliver Messiaen and all of these people that emerged in the 12-tone serial music period, which I'm sure from being from New York.
No, I'm not very familiar with
it was a period of time where percussion was brought into a context that was extremely intellectual, very difficult music, and that was my aspiration. For example, just as an aside, it's actually very influential in the way I think. A man named Enos Xenakis, he was an architect slash musician. And he wrote a brilliant thesis called Art, Science, Alloys. And this is one of the most important things I ever read that influenced the way I think about the bridging, the synergy of the humanities and the arts. And in percussion, there's no other greater synthesis, because anything is a percussion instrument, you know. So anything can be considered. And what it is, it's sound organized based on your preference and how you interpret it, and therefore you have your own vocabulary that's almost immediate, because anything can be an instrument. Unlike, say, a piano, which has a tonality that's, you know, it's strict.
Yeah.
So anyway, not to go on that tangent,
I have a friend in my building is Ornette Coleman.
Oh, sure, absolutely. That's a brilliant experimental musician.
Yeah, he was trained in that, but he also, his son, Donardo. Do you know him or not? Or
no,
Donardo's his percussionist, his son.
Oh, really?
Really good, really good. Donardo's getting to my uneducated thing, and he said we've had very good discussions with Ornette. He's older like I am and everything, but he said he thought there was music before there was language.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and then drumming might have been the first music.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
By all means, anthropologists would agree with that too.
Is that true? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I didn't mean to get you off.
No, it's a fun subject. Yeah. So I very rarely get to talk about my musical influence with people, with my activism and the writing and the Zeitgeist Movement.
You want to hear another interesting thing?
Sure.
Yeah, there was Beethoven was a pretty good composer.
I'd say so.
And he wrote music. This is a thing they had on one of the channels. He wrote music, and he was deaf.
Yeah.
You know, and he wrote music that the piano at the time was instrument, the ability to do it. The piano at the time was limited in what it was able to get from the score.
Okay.
You understand?
The range.
It was, and there was advancement being made. And it was when they got a piano, I don't know, it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years later or so, they got a piano that was more able to get to the nuance of the
thing,
and it brought out the beauty that hadn't been able to be heard. Do you understand what I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that interesting in terms of music, you know?
Absolutely.
And the importance of music. But anyway, go ahead.
Definitely. So, long story short, after trying to survive as a musician and living here in New York and Brooklyn and traveling all around and getting paid, $40 to do an opera sub and very hard to sustain.
Right.
I decided I had to do something else, so I started to do video. And video to me is very, very interesting because it's phrasing. Video editing and filmmaking is phrasing just like music is.
I guess that's true.
You have a vocabulary, you have time, you have a rhythm. So that's how I naturally went into that. Didn't think much of it, frankly. I just needed a job, as many of us do in this society. Okay, I've got to get a job. I can't do my passion, or it's too difficult to do it. I can't survive to do it, especially in New York. And I grew to love filmmaking and editing. It's a wonderful art form. And it wasn't until 2007 that I decided to actually put my first piece together, which was a combination of music and video.
Okay.
And that was called Zeitgeist. That was the 2007 the first Zeitgeist of the trilogy, and that came out. I actually performed that piece, believe it or not. So that was actually a performance piece that I did in Lower Manhattan for 6 nights. And so I had 2 big screens set up, and I had a big percussion, multiple percussion, 20 contemporary percussion ensembles set up for solo percussion. And I did this piece. And the amazing thing about that is I didn't think anything of it. I threw it up on the internet. And at that point, feature films in 2007.
But was it a feature film or was it a musical concert thing?
Both. It was both, basically.
Okay, yeah. So did you have a theme? Did you have a script?
Well, it was basically the entire film.
But I mean words that were like a documentary rather than just the theme that's you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. It was a vaudevillian concept where you have live performance with video, and you combine the live performance with video, which is very rare. People don't do that very often today. It's sort of like a stage performance, but with a film instead of the actors. And
right.
But that's what sparked the entire Zeitgeist phenomenon, if you will, was this performance piece. Because once I put it on the internet, it went viral with tens of millions of views in the first couple of months. The press, the press that would focus on it because it's counterculture. A lot of people.
It was countercultural.
Definitely. Yeah.
In terms of the music or in terms of the content? Because your content of the Zeitgeist Movement that I watched last night had a great deal of political relevance to it and a critique of the society at a very basic and elemental and important level.
No, I appreciate that.
Did the first Zeitgeist Movement have that critique of the society?
It had yes.
You can have music that's pretty. Or nice, and does even tell its story.
Sure.
But it doesn't have political content.
This had a very, very, very critical political content to it as well.
So you were I don't want to use, I'll use the term out of the ours, you were again a good deal of what the political order was offering in terms of the organization of human society. At the time you did the Zeitgeist movie?
I'm sorry, but what are you referencing?
You were against.
Against, oh.
That's what again is a term from the Appalachian, where they speak more closely the English of William Shakespeare there than anywhere else in the world.
Oh, interesting.
Also, it's a hillbilly talk.
Sure.
Again. But you had a critique of the society.
Yes, and that's what I think. It was also religion. Religion was brought up quite heavily in that first film.
Okay.
And then it evolved to the second film a year later, which I featured sustainability concepts. I featured a lot of different monetary critiques, things that we could do. Basically, it marked. I had an interview with a man named John Perkins who talked about how global debt is being used.
Well, that's the economic hitman.
Exactly. He was amazing.
Lucy Commissar, you know Lucy? She did. Well, he had a book with her too. She was one that showed offshore banking and that.
Oh yeah, sure. But the corruption is, as you know, just goes to infinity in this world.
It's almost 360 degrees. You can find dysfunction.
Yeah.
It seems.
Almost, I guess, and that's my biggest interest. Not to jump ahead too much. But what is the source of this flaw of our behavior? A lot of people say, oh, it's our genetics. They like to dismiss it all and say we're just apes that can't behave well, which I don't buy that, because we are very vulnerable and incredibly creative, problem-solving organisms.
Right.
And our cultural evolution over the course of the past 2,000 years has been exceptional. And our brain hasn't changed that much in that time.
I think not.
So the question is, can we make, and this is my whole intro to the Zeitgeist Movement, can we make a better society, changing what we consider to be the traditional normality to an extent where we can do something very different, raise humanity to a higher level. And as I know your experience with R. Buckminster Fuller, we live in a time, and we've been living in a time for decades now, that we don't have to have the have-nots anymore.
Do you realize what a big statement that is?
I hope it's
no, I mean, in a certain sense, Fuller did that. That we've lived in a condition. Well, I guess mostly you've done a lot of reading, a lot of thought. Obviously you're intellectually oriented and all that. 200,000 years, I guess, now that our species is here.
That's about
what they seem to be coming up with. Did you see the thing in Georgia? They found Homo erectus in Georgia, in the country of Georgia. That seems to be our immediate predecessor.
Oh, really? Okay.
I thought it was Homo habilis. I used to say it. I was wrong.
Right.
And it's synergetics. The emerging properties come out.
Sure.
You learn. And nothing. Synergy is the behavior system unpredicted by the sum of the parts, which leaves you to where you don't have any absolutes.
Exactly.
Because there are emerging properties all the time in terms of evolution.
It's like weather patterns or chemistry. Exactly.
But we get 200,000 years. That's about 10,000 generations. And there are institutions that have come out of that and everything. And did a program with Isaac Asimov when he said, you're younger, but this is the defining generation. He's thinking in terms of maybe a 100-year sweep or something. That a qualitative change, not just a quantitative change of a new era of Democrat, Republican, or something like that, a historical change that makes up all the news, but a qualitative change in terms of the evolutionary process itself. Does that make any sense to you? It
does. I would say that we're on the edge.
Yeah.
And this is why Fuller is so prophetic.
Yeah.
We have been living in a Malthusian, scarcity-oriented worldview for so long.
Forever.
So we believe that this type of behavior, that we have to compete and fight, there's not enough to go around.
Right.
Remember, they justified slavery the same way. They used the socially Darwinistic view, and they said, well, these people they can't live. I mean, the carrying capacity wasn't designed to have them be as high of a high standard of living.
Right.
They invented all sorts of things, which we could talk at length about. I say they in the sense of the mindset, which unfortunately has bled right into what we call market capitalism, which is something that I specifically go after these days, because people are afraid. They think that the market, in this free market concept, that it enables some type of human liberty that will never be transcended. And that's absolutely untrue, because it's not synergetically oriented. It's based on the self-interest orientation. It's based on people seeking advantage, obviously, because it's based on scarcity. So we compete. And how can you have a balanced of anything, whether it's environmental or whether it's cultural, if everyone's thinking that way? And Fuller came along and said, no, we can have a high standard of living for everyone on Earth right now, many, many billions more, in fact, if we manage our resources in a scientifically strategic way.
Well, also introduce design.
Exactly.
Being able to, there's a term that he used, he coined a lot of terms. One was ephemeralization. Doing more with less. Through good design, geodesic It's the basis of the information technologies. Carbon-60 is going to emerge. Nanotechnology is just over the horizon.
Exactly.
You'll have building materials 1,000 times the strength of steel and weigh nothing.
Absolutely.
I mean, so there are new advantages that can come through good design.
That's exactly what I mean by efficiency applied. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is the new. That's when coming back to our point.
Yeah.
As you spoke of Asimov.
Yeah.
The great transition, as you could reference it,
Yeah.
is where humanity decides to actually cooperate and engage this type of design, rather than fight in the way that we have.
Okay, it's been hard won. I think the point I'm making is it's been hard won. All the resources were here, all the oil, all the land, all the creatures. They were here when we came out of the cave 200,000 years ago. We had a liaison, not only with the self-reflective consciousness that can ask really questions like Cro-Magnon cave things, or quasi-spiritual questions of what's it all about, Alfie kind of thing.
Sure.
But we also had a unique capability of extending our consciousness through tools and technology and making the world other than in an Ede-like sense is the way in which most creatures are embedded in nature, don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it was throughout most of that time, I think a lot of people say, we were probably prey for a very long time. We're all out of Africa.
Sure.
Of the big cats. They could run faster and eat us with regularity.
Right.
So it wasn't such a pristine, beautiful world that we lived in.
Oh, no.
We had a liaison with now.
Yeah.
That is only now.
Right.
And it wasn't able to be now ever in the past. We've come to the end of a whole period of institution building for thought process and everything that culminates now to where your younger generation can come along and sense this is a time of qualitative liberation that has only been dreamed of in terms of our epistemologies and so forth, if you can follow.
Absolutely, I follow it, absolutely.
Yeah. And the Zeitgeist Movement touches into that.
Oh, that's, I think what you're inching into is there's a value orientation where people need to understand not only their relationship to the environment and their relationship to each other, but they have to realize that the feelings that they have that are so built into the old system, the Malthusian scarcity system, need to be addressed.
Well, it's not, if I may, it's not just, if I may.
Yeah,
I may be wrong.
Sure.
I may be wrong.
No, please.
But it's not just the Malthusian. It's the whole of the human experience. It's not just, it's always been, in terms of capability, scarce. And in a certain sense, it's always been, that's zero sum. For one to win, somebody else had to lose. There's not nearly enough was characteristic of an order that we're trying to see birthing itself now, where there can be enough for all and the ecology and fit into the nature, the pattern of nature that nature provides. That it's a qualitative, almost like speciation, or a moment of qualitative transformation in the universe collectively.
I absolutely agree. I guess I use the term Malthusian because it's probably the most highlighting social detrimental train of thought that is held through for so long. It goes long before Malthus. And of course Malthus isn't addressing the environment per se, because we're degrading the environment almost as bad as we're degrading the sense of public health in the human condition. So I look at an economics, to kind of step broadly back, as public health. You know, that's really what it's about. But public health is right there with ecological health, obviously. And the market and the system of market capitalism has evolved as it is, based on, again, on that scarcity premise, can't understand these two ideas. It only can see the exchange. It can only see the action. It doesn't actually support, in an empirical sense, either one of these. If it's a natural byproduct that either of these balance out, which it clearly hasn't been, then that's good, but that's obviously not the case. So coming back to the Zeitgeist Movement, the deepest element of our work is to show the world in transition what's possible, just as Fuller tried to do, and then to establish systems that can design out the current mode, and then bring in a new social infrastructure that's based on intelligent resource management and a kind of human synergetic relationship that doesn't see each other as threats as we do now, but rather as agents of each other, where we help each other.
Cooperation.
Of course.
And
the unique thing about all of it is that our evolution has always been fueled by cooperation more than it has been by competition.
That's probably true. That's been operative,
Because all you have to do is look at the evolution of intellectual thought, and what is underneath all of that. the sharing of information. Even in the most competitive environments, people will, some cell phone company makes something over here, they hoard their proprietary knowledge, they don't want to release what they're doing. Another one over here has some other information, but they basically have the same root information. But they release this phone here with some idea, the idea becomes public, they adapt the idea, they improve it, so you have this back and forth. But that's competitive, right? What underlies it? Sharing of information. So it's still sharing.
That is true.
So you and I we didn't invent our words. All the things that we talk about intellectually, they are literally developed from literally millions of years of the source of communication. You go back to almost the start of molecular biology to see how we've evolved to think the way we do, why we have the hands we do. So everything's interconnected. And I'll say one more point on that. There's a property notion in society. And people think, okay, well, I own my phone. Well, you don't own your phone. You didn't develop the ideas that made that. You didn't create the machine that was used to harness that polymer that set that, that casing in motion. So there's no such thing as property.
Particularly with roboticization, even more, the human input is even diminishing to the vanishing point almost.
That's another level too, absolutely. The whole labor theory of value and
it is being questioned now, and yet it informs virtually the entire economic and political system of the world. At the moment.
Right. See,
major problem.
Absolutely. That's something that the market doesn't understand. So there's a clash of consciousness coming from our technical capacity where we are literally fighting our own progress because we're not able to update the social system the way that we need to allow for the ephemeralization to take hold, to free humanity from the drudgery of a 9-to-5 job that they probably don't like because they just have to do something for work, to actually elevate the have-nots to a high standard of living, which by the way would reduce, because of the synergy, reduce all the wars, all the crime, all the, the greatest predictor of child abuse is poverty.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you want, and what happens when people are poor and they grow up and they're abused? They get more abusive. They turn into serial killers. They turn into criminals on multiple levels. They have an interest to hurt others because they never trusted the society to begin with. So all of that causal stuff is rooted in this inefficiency that is no longer necessary.
It's no longer necessary, but I think it's important, particularly, maybe I'm older, is to keep in mind that is James Joyce had Daedalus say, history is a nightmare, one could say, of injustice, from which we're attempting to awaken.
Ooh, wow.
So it wasn't something that was, what is perhaps going on? And heralding is being heralded by the Zeitgeist Movement in the film and the thing they're trying to do, wasn't possible at any time other than now. So you had Dickensian terms, and they were not able to do that, to have anything like what we're thinking is now coming exponential. Like a locomotive. The future's catching up with us. So we ought to be a little bit understanding of the elders or the older systems, and those systems are reified in our architecture, in our institutional structure, in our thinking, everything. So it's a really big change that's coming, and it's a little hard to get your mind around it, to go from not enough to sufficiency. That's transcending scarcity, material scarcity. Dialectical materialism. All of the means by which people have organized society. So we ought to be a little patient if that's the right term.
I'm definitely patient. I think we should have a great amount of respect for the evolution itself. I was just joking with your producer that I look at the current state of, I look at a maturity process, right? So you had, humanity's been playing in sandboxes for a long time, and then it grows up to blocks and running around like little kids. And now I think we're sort of at the adolescent stage, the early adolescent stage, where we've been experimenting with all of our new physics ideas, all of our tools, all the resources. We've been able to toy around, and we have the free market that has been able to, give voice to a certain effect to people that were just, they might not be paying attention to the environment, they might not be paying attention to society, but they're working and they're learning, and science is progressing. But now we're at a point with the systems thinking that is so critical that, okay, boom, we have to start to think about this as a whole. We can't fragment anymore.
Well, I think that's really important, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing that will lead to our survival more than that process.
And some of the guys, that would be thinking comprehensively, systems thinking, as you said, and your film stresses that. Incidentally, the film is beautifully done. You had responsibility for that. You were a director?
I do everything in that. Since I did the video editing, I do music, so I literally, because I don't have a lot of money, so I do literally everything.
Do you use Kurzweil or do you use Final Cut or do you use
I did use Final
Avid?
Cut. I did use Final Cut, and I use a program called Logic, which was also made by Apple.
You really do well. I mean, you
you
could play that like that Beethoven sonata. That it could be heard with the piano, with the computer. There's a metaphor in there somewhere. Sure. I'm not sure.
Well, music's still my first physical love.
That's good.
It's probably one of the most advanced art forms ever because it engages the physics of our natural world, the Overtone series, and it combines it with cultural aesthetic development. A painting can't really do that. You know, visual arts are too static. Motion, of course, is great, but the difference between film and music is that you watch a film, you might like it, but it's overbearing in its complexity and the multi-sensor thing. But music, you listen to the same song over and over again. You love it. It becomes a part of you, this sympathetic resonance.
Ornette said he thought there was music before there was language.
I think
I don't know how you can know, you know, but
I think that's probably true. I also do a music festival every single year in Los
Angeles.
You do
where? Do you locate it somewhere geographically, or does it move, or what?
It's only in Los Angeles, but there's people that mirror it. It's part of the Zeitgeist Movement. We do a media festival, which is focused mostly on music.
Yeah, we're going to do that. Do you have residence somewhere that you call home now? I don't mean to pry. I know you travel a lot. You're Los Angeles.
Yes.
So, okay.
But I was here again for 14 years, and I just wanted to change the scenery. I still love New York, though, the beehive that it is.
Yeah, it is a great town. I lived in Long Beach for a year there out there. The weather was gorgeous. Every day is beautiful. I mean, you know, I don't know why the hell we still live in these climes, but New York has a charm about it and everything like that. So I'm glad we were able to catch you now. Now, the movement is also I'm glad we agree, and that there's a good deal of youth and important intellectual thinking youth that cottons on, as they say, to Fuller.
Absolutely.
And maybe to McLuhan and that, who are thinking intellectually, relevant people, comprehensive in their nature. There was also a fellow now, and you that I associate with when I think Zeitgeist Movement, with Jacques
Fresco. Jacques Fresco, yeah.
And he had things going down at the Venice Project. Is there a connection?
Venus Project.
Venus, that's what I meant. Venus, I'm sorry.
That's
Venus
correct.
Project down in Florida or something. I haven't associated with that. Goes back 15 years or something, I'm thinking back. Is he relevant in terms of the zeitgeist? Because you do quote him very strongly and well in your film,
When the Zeitgeist Movement first started, there was a partnership between the Venus Project and the movement. But there are certain interests that deviated, and basically it was decided that the two institutions wouldn't have direct functionality together. Jacques works in his design work, brilliant architect and engineer.
He had a woman that worked with him carefully too.
His partner,
I forget her name.
Roxanne.
Roxanne, that's it. Yeah, right.
And they do tremendous.
I had respect for him, what he was trying to do.
Absolutely, he builds right on Fuller's work. And he applies it into a design context that's very design, very specific. And that's it's unfortunate I don't see a lot of things coming to fruition with that design work, in the sense that not many people are building upon it, which is unfortunate.
It was inspirational in a sense to you as a younger man.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
But that was only a couple of years ago. My first influence was still Fuller. And in fact, I made my second film, Zeitgeist Addendum. I was originally going to feature Mr. Fuller throughout the second half, because he was my solution orientation then. And I realized that the Venus Project was like, wow, this is Jacques Fresco. He's brilliant. He's building right on Fuller's concept. I mean, I have heavily influenced by Fuller, clearly. And he's doing this. So that's why I decided to feature him in Addendum. And they seem to be doing fairly well. They keep creating media. He's about 95, 96 now, so. But he's still plugging away.
Is he still in Florida?
He is.
Yeah, he's still there. I thought they were going to have to. Okay, well, anyway, just to get at the sources, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's good that it was Fuller like that you're talking about, and that it's going. But then now it's built out to be using, and you're making this film, and it's been millions of hits. I mean, it's really been a hit. It's all over the world.
With all three films, I would estimate there's at least 400 million that have seen all three films in total.
That's a lot of humanity,
an enormous number of people. There's unique timing that happened when the whole thing started.
Yeah. So what have you got, a 3-year vector you're talking there, or how many years is that?
It's been actually six years.
Okay, well, relatively recent.
Sure.
And I congratulate you on that.
Well, thank you.
400 million is a very lot lot of people.
And uniquely, it was unintended, which is what I find most interesting.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah,
huh?
but
John Cage.
The best stuff is always unintended, where your motivations are are not trying to gain an audience, not trying to do what people seem to interpret that you're doing.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'll be perfectly honest, my activism interests were very, very low on my sense of priority. I was a musician, which means a musician is inherently narcissistic. You lock yourself into a practice room for 8 hours a day, and you're as antisocial as you could get. But I realized
God bless him.
Well, everything has its role. In this synergy.
Right.
I mean, if I didn't have music to escape from the the qualms
the drab news reality.
Of course. So I guess my point is, I felt pushed. So when I introduced people to Fuller, or introduced people to the Venus Project, or engaged activism, I was very hesitant originally to do anything, to be perfectly frank. I was very hesitant to be put in a position where I could be attacked and say, oh, well, there's another political upstart. That wasn't who I was at that point, which I think is important to state. So I wasn't really an activist back then. I was socially concerned, but I was too distracted with my own narcissism. And I woke up, though. I was like, wow. And I'll put it this way. All the work that I've done has been pushed. I just feel pushed by a community. They say, oh, we love what you're doing. You should keep doing that. Okay, I'll make a second film. I'll make a third film. And now I'm going to do a new film trilogy. It's live action, sort of a science fiction concept.
You're involved in that now?
I'm working on preparing for it.
Is it a long process? You're in charge of it, the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I mean, again, I'm a low budget producer. I do
nothing.
If you develop the skills,
if you know what you're doing,
absolutely.
The skills. So that can be something available to everybody. Almost now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the equipment's getting available in a way that it's a miracle.
The democratization of technology, because of again ephemeralization, has been absolutely incredible. People wouldn't conceive of. I'm sure when you look into your studio and you see all the computers. I mean, how are you editing your first videos? I assume you edited them on big tapes, right?
Well, I got to use. I've been in public access since the beginning because there was no tape. I mean, there was. I can remember. I'll share it with you briefly.
Sure.
I was middle class lawyer, dentist next door, and it was the Second War. As they go way back. And it came out, and all the production had gone into war making. The airplanes and things at Willow Run and that, and then the dentist lived next door to us, and he was like one family. His son was my best friend. We grew up together and all. And they had got the first car that came off the assembly line. We were in Detroit, and it was a Dodge, 1946. Everything else was from the 30s. And then they got a television set, and we put the television set in the corner of the room, the living room. There was no programming at all. There was a test pattern, That's what it was. There was a test pattern, and we would look at the test pattern, and then came Kukla, Friend, and Ollie. But you had to have the invention of videotape before you could have an industry. That was Peter Goldmark Sr. invented videotape, and his secretary Bonnie was nice. And they invented it, so then you were off to the race, and the hardware went to Japan, and then there came back from Japan for an individual, like we are, let's say, a thing called a Porto pack. That was a little thing you wore on your hip, and you put a 20-minute black and white tape in a camera. You can get 20 minutes of video.
Sure.
I got the use of about the 7th one that came off the boat from Japan.
Oh, wow.
Namjoon Paik got the first, or the president did, but I got that through my friend. Did I mention on the air my friend passed, or was that before?
I don't think you did.
Oh, well, anyway, I had a friend, Paul Ryan, who was an assistant to Marshall McLuhan. He was at, so that's why I got the use of the port effect to go off to Washington and do for senators and whatnot.
Got it.
But anyway, it got all that done, and then, so it's the longest running program in public access. I'm getting off on a track of public. I believe in public access, and multimedia is important communication, and this is an important part of the multimedia educational potential of multimedia itself, which I have a great abiding belief in. I think your Zeitgeist film is part of an educational autodidactic tendency within our society, and I congratulate you on you. I've been chugging along for a long time, but
well, I guess back to my point. The technological advancements are incredible, and it goes to show that we need to get our head around the trends that are occurring, these exponential trends, and really begin to see the potential to solve looming problems that have been with us for millennia, because we can finally solve them now.
Well,
and this is the great shift.
That thing to where there is enough.
Yeah.
You have to whisper it. there is enough.
And of
there
course,
never has been enough ontologically.
Right.
So the quality or the significance of the change that's in the offing is not just like a thing about one political change or something. It affects virtually all of our institutions that have inherited out of a condition that's being qualitatively transformed before our very eyes.
Exactly. So
it's a magic time.
The transition is going to be quite epic.
It will be synergetic, and we can't know what it will be, but it was almost comparable to coming to the end of the Homo sapiens species.
Sure, sure.
There will be a species transcendent to what Homo sapien has been, just as we were transcendent to Homo Australopithecine up the hominoid line.
Sure.
There will be something, and the trends toward that transcending scarcity, material scarcity, is going, and there are more haves than have-nots at the level of capability in a trend that goes like this, and that ought to be taking the design implications. Political institutions, educational institutions, they should be taking notice of this qualitative change, but they're all reified, understandably, the institutions that already exist that are being reified or reestablished and supported.
Exactly. And you can blame...
They should be subsumed, perhaps. I don't know.
Well,
rather than overthrown.
Overthrow
which can
is a
become
complex
a political
word. Yeah,
it is.
I think it's just as Fuller would describe. You just build a new model that people see the merit of, and you assume rationally that these older institutions will see the logic, and then they'll move and change and transition. But here's one thing I'd like to say.
That's what we would like to see.
Sure, but one of the problems, and this is something that I think isn't addressed much with people that talk about the state of advancing technology, from the Singularity Institute to a number of other progressive institutions out there, they don't seem to understand that this market phenomenon preserves scarcity. It preserves institutions. It has an interest, it has a very core survival reaction, I would say, that doesn't want anything to threaten what has been pre-established.
Yeah, well, that's an old, that's the ancient regime, they call it in France, you know,
And people look at that, they say, oh, that's just a power neuroses. But it is a power neuroses, but it's constantly reinforced by the acquisition of money and the entire process that underlies market capitalism. So the reason I bring that up is because the movement isn't just about the advocation of all these possibilities that Fuller and others have put forward. It's the recognition that the current model is extremely inhibiting. And it's gonna fight this type of progress. And I'll make one more point in a value system sort of disorder that is amalgamated. I mean, we can all talk about materialism. We have a whole subculture that values themselves based on what they own. You know, there are so many people out there, and that's old news. It
is. I think it's been in existence from Rome to dynastic states to early America, and
No, the fashion element, but it's gotten much worse. We have a consumption society. Where you might remember in the early 20th century, the mid 20th century, post the Great Depression in America, there's been a number of books written on this. There's a man named Edward Bernays, for example, who is a propagandist.
He was a PR guy. The head of PR.
And he's heavily credited with turning America into a consumer culture. One of many, where he said, for example, before World War II, we consumed half per capita resources.
The United States, you mean?
And the Western world by extrapolation. Than we do now. Now, what does that mean? It means that we're becoming less satisfied. It means that we demand more for some reason. We have no recognition of the environmental relationship. We have no recognition of such synergies. We want more and more. And this, my main point is that this neuroses has come forward, and it's absolutely prolific in 20th century economic writings, where this idea of infinite wants. Have you ever heard that phrase being used?
Well, I have. I can see where it could be used as that. It would be part of a thing of saying it's ipso facto absurd to think there could be enough, because our wants are, you know, until you've got a swimming pool full of diamonds of the highest order, you're not a
Exactly.
That's an absurd obsession.
And that is a core staple of economic philosophy amongst almost every school.
And it underscores all of our political and economic rationales by which the planet operates currently, does it not?
It justifies the homelessness, justifies the third world living in a dilapidated environment. Yeah. It justifies the imbalance. And the way
it's also a mark of great insecurity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole point of this consumeristic culture that was put forward.
Right.
I mean, there are people... there are people in Africa now that don't have running water. Yeah. They don't have electricity, but they have cell phones. That's interesting to me.
Well, that is a jump. Yeah.
It shows the sense of priority.
Yeah.
In a certain, I mean, there's other reasons for that, which is due to ephemeralization.
Yeah,
it's become that inexpensive because it's so easy to produce.
And the information is going exponential. And the robotics are catching up with it. I think the robotic process.
Oh, sure.
Hans Morgenthau and the guys at Carnegie Mellon, the robotic thing, everything being produced in a mass economy is becoming not only information technology, airplanes are going to fly themselves, but also robotics, the production of mass goods.
The means of production is getting
becoming
smaller.
robotized, and the way in which the labor input to it is being eliminated.
Right.
So we have a pretty fix because we don't have an economic system that can form capital.
Yep.
And also distribute demand and buying power to clear the market.
Precisely. So you
a major problem, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the only solution to that, just like they did in the mid-20th century, is to have people want more and more. New industries that are made that are service-oriented, or anything that actually puts people into a position. Like I have a joke I often talk about where...
Tell a joke. Go
well,
on.
It's not really a joke.
Pretend you're in a club doing shtick, you know? Can you do that or no? Go ahead. No.
No, I haven't graduated to that yet.
Okay.
But I will say that, and on these social networks that are very popular today, there's little games people play, and they can get credits that can be exchanged for monetary value. Usually it's used for purchase coupons.
Yeah, right.
But I often joke about everyone just sits, the entire economy is just everyone playing these games in the future, making little credits so they can do something with them that only can exist in the digital realm.
Don't
you know what I mean?
Think we might get to a point where, after all, you can only eat so many T-bone steaks? I mean, once you've had a steak, you don't need more. That might be one of the hopes of the world, that people can begin to understand, rather than I better gobble it up, there is enough for all.
Yeah.
If that does, that's a whole different ethic and a whole different way of psychology among the people, if there is enough. And then people have, imagine everybody having what they need in order to realize their full potentiality.
Exactly.
What's wrong with that?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Full potential realization is not how much stuff you own, it's what you learn to do. And that's the great, that's hopefully to me.
Yeah, but let's not just say that's a good way. They used to say with the old darkies on this plantation, look, they're all happy slapping their knee and playing a banjo.
Right.
But they weren't. There was slavery,
of course,
you know, and it's still slavery.
Right, of course.
And so, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
I guess some of those things that people want, like I want something to eat, I mean, that's reasonable and a good place to live, and maybe even a little better than just adequate.
Right.
You know, Marx said, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. But how about reasonable wants?
Right.
Reasonable wants.
That is exactly
there's
one of the
dialectic there, or there's a nuance there that has to be understood in a new way.
And
how do you think? The Zeitgeist Movement might be tuned into that, it seems to me.
Here's how I would think about that rationally.
Yeah.
If you have a society and you've decided to actually have human rights, which we more or less have on this planet.
We have a declaration since '48, but...
Well, obviously with the inherent corruption and the baggage of the scarcity system, it's very suspect. But
the scarcity system.
But let's just remember that we do generally want to respect each other. Racism has subsided. Classism's a bit of a distortion. People do have that classism thing where they...
Well, that's based on economics.
Exactly. They assume that it's just the way it is, you know. But if you look at it from an environmental standpoint, we can't have everything we want. Not every human being can have anything it wants in this infinite consumption process.
I'd put an additional thing in there, reasonable. Now that could be, I'm not happy until I got a swimming pool full of diamonds.
Sure.
But that's a neurosis.
Precisely.
Or a psychosis coming out of a condition of scarcity itself.
Exactly. And I guess my point is, if people looked at the rational state of a finite planet, of the entire point of an economy being the management of this scarcity resources, they would realize, just as you walk down the street, you don't litter, at least most people don't, they realize, oh, you know, I shouldn't go and buy this 50-room mansion with 2 jets. That's really offensive and actually violent because you're going to systematically hurt others because of this inherent scarcity.
You can understand it in a way because it's a reaction. There's somebody saying you take a bow and arrow, the harder you pull it back, the harder it is to go, the more swift goes the arrow, or something like that.
Right.
So there's a lot of pent-up angst in the world and everything, so people would want to have that, and they've been denied so long. It's always been a few people owned everything, the kings, and the peasants were wallowing around in the mud. And all throughout all of history. So it's a big change that's coming.
It's a huge change, a huge...
Now, you've got the film and you got the work, and we got agreement on some of these people that are informing that. Politically or economically, and you've got a movement. Let's get to that. We only got a little bit of time. Sorry.
That's all right.
But you're too damned interesting. That's a very... Slow down.
Well, I'll have to
slow down. Think a little slowly, you know. No, I'm just joking. But, I mean, the thing is that that movement is all over the world now. I mean, you've got a whole lot of meetings and people who are cottoning on, as they say, to what's being said. So what you're saying becomes more and more important all the time, it seems to me.
Yes.
Do you sense that yourself? It's sort of taking off.
It has a life of its own.
Yeah, right.
And I often comment, I say, everyone's in the Zeitgeist movement, whether they know it or not.
Oh, right.
Because Zeitgeist, the spirit of the time.
Spirit of the age.
And every time we interact with each other, every time we give a homeless person something, every time we vote, or if you believe in voting, which I kind of don't anymore, but every time you do anything, it makes an influence in this synergy that is our lives. That's why we should be very careful when we talk to each other. You know, we got to be careful with our anger. We have to be careful with what we set in motion.
There's a lot of anger. Trying to find the enemy. Who's to blame for all this
well, let me ask you. We live in an age of people going into movie theaters and shooting people. Of a guy recently in L.A. went into an airport. That stuff did not happen in your generation earlier.
Remember. No, they used to have, somebody who was a a woman who used to have the lollipop thing. It was the lollipop syndrome. That was, can a child go to the store and buy a lollipop and come back without having any violence done? There was a thing. It's there somewhere. It's a little vague. But it was the thing to indicate. You never thought about any violence.
And then you had Occupy come along. Just a couple of years ago. And then the Arab Spring. You had there's a lot. There's a civil rights oriented movement or protest happening somewhere on the planet all the time.
Well, there is protest happening, and in a certain sense, a good deal of what comes out of the Zeitgeist film and the movie is a protest in a way of the system in a way.
Right.
And Jacques Perez, you have he in there, and he's saying the whole damn thing has to change.
Absolutely.
I said, okay, good, Jacques.
Definitely.
But okay, so you got that movement, and then now what about a thing? We got a world set up among a dialect. We got a private sector and a public sector. I hear you're using the term resource-based economy rather than going through the Federal Reserve and all of that. But we have a private sector, public sector. Is there any commonality between how do those two things relate, both nationally and internationally, as we move ahead in terms of the real world?
Well, I would split some hairs and say that we don't really have a public sector. All we have is a private sector. Even the state institution, if you really break down where their motivations, where their influence, where their policies, how they even execute things like fixing roads and the like, which you would consider to be sanctioned from the public institution, it's actually all private. In fact, we've seen the privatization of everything as well.
Well, that's since Friedman. That's since Friedman and so forth, particularly Papco and Reagan.
I'm splitting hairs here.
I know.
Because most people talk about the public sector with basically this overarching kind of state control. They would say that the public sector has something to do with a non-trade-based orientation. And that's actually never been the case. It's had the appearance of that because there is state control, but what's behind the state? And this is something I argue a lot. The state is the commercial entities and the commercial powers.
Well, that's an interesting take, and you don't see a distinction between that and the corporate structure.
I see the corporate and state structure literally as one.
It's one. Oh, they've colluded.
Well, but they've always look at the kings.
They've always colluded.
The mercantilist period. The
Yeah, but they've always colluded.
Exactly, always.
You had people, you had feudal kings and everything.
Absolutely.
And so nothing's new in that.
And they were the supreme economic masters.
But we do have the government, or governmental activity. When Eisenhower was president, the tax rate was 92% coming out of the war.
Right.
I mean, that was a lot of, and they build up. And then so we got a private sector and a public sector. That's still a dialectic holding in this country and around the world.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. I could, just on the private, the institution of private property or ownership of let's just say, a piece of capital asset.
Right.
That would be a means by which income could be distributed. Is that to be eliminated, or is it to be understood one big cooperative, a Madrigon on large steroids?
All that language.
Or how are we going to relate to those issues, if you understand?
Absolutely, I absolutely understand. What we're looking at in the future is an open source world.
Okay.
Where the public.
That comes out of cybernetics,
Yeah, absolutely.
Good,
well, the idea of sharing everything. All knowledge specifically. So there's no proprietary knowledge. You go on the internet and see all the designs that are happening, and you can contribute. Because if you think about it, there's
open source is beautiful.
There's no such thing as property. Property is something that we've conjured up for the scarcity management. I don't really own anything. As I said earlier, the intellectual thing that made your stopwatch there, you didn't invent that. Therefore, you can't physically own the idea. And
they tried to through trademark.
Of course they tried, but that's false.
And that's intellectual property rights.
Of course, which is all nonsense.
But that's part of the world order.
This one, absolutely.
Yeah, the way it is.
But in the truth of the matter is, there's no such thing as property. You can't own anything physical. It's not really connected. And I would suggest philosophically, we don't even own ourselves. It's, in other words, in the broad scheme, over the course of long-term synergetic evolution, life and death, and the exchange of knowledge and sharing of information, every single word that's coming out of my mouth is learned. So I don't really own my ideas. I don't. Everything I'm talking to you right now isn't really me. I'm just the embodiment of all the information and all the experience that I've had synergetically come into me.
And so is everyone.
And coming back to coming back to the property notion, we live in an access society. And that's what I think is the most beautiful concept.
Spell it out.
An access society, in the context of what the Zeitgeist Movement promotes, is that everything is accessed, nothing is owned, and you can share everything through existing systems, created systems that are designed to allow people to have access to automobiles and everything that you'd ever need in an abundance, but they don't need to have it and hoard it. So I'm a filmmaker. I have lots of film equipment. I don't really want to own it, but I need to because of the resale value. You know. So if I rent something that's $200 and I rent it 5 times, I pay $1,000. I might have been able to just buy that thing for $1,000, and I could have it to resell for a slightly less percentage. But in an access society, there's no need for the monetary value. Therefore, no one has to hoard anything. So I would just go to a library, and I would get the camera.
Public library.
You could call it a library of instruments, a library of goods, a library of cars. It's simply a reservoir that's been statistically calculated to have everything that region demands and needs in an abundance for access.
And even urban environments that make sense without having to ship things from all over the world. And that is spelled out in your film.
Localization. We need to localize. All of our food should be grown locally. We don't, with vertical farming and the like, we don't need to go to China to get strawberries. Or, for example, there's a recent statistic that America grows a great deal of cotton still.
I guess that's true.
90% of the cotton that China uses comes from America. And they make, of course, I think probably 90% of the clothes that America, well, I'd say less than that, probably 70% of the clothes that America uses. Don't quote me on these percentages, but here's the proportion. And what do? We put them on ships, the cotton on ships, waste all this petroleum, only to have slave labor basically make this stuff, and then send it back to us. You know how much energy and labor has been wasted?
Yeah, they couldn't have done that before they had containerization and so
of course.
That happened. That was another technological thing that made it possible. All built on fossil fuels.
Sure.
And everything like that.
The efficiency.
But there is a private sector. There's corporations and there's government, and that's still a thing that evolves.
It looks that way.
always think synergetic. I really think
there's no separation between the state and the public sector and the private sector. Never has been, because in order for one to exist, the other one has to exist.
I think it's all a big three-card Monte game.
Well, I think it's fundamentally flawed, because power is given to the state, and it can abuse that power by public sanction.
The power is held by the private property ownership of the corporations that have, stock certificates that you can have to get you money.
Sure.
Because you have and when you form the capital, you could have ownership. If you're going to have a private sector, or we're going to eliminate it. You essentially would eliminate that and everything be... There are Marxists who would think that way. They would get rid of the private sector, labor theory of value, everybody, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. This is different from that.
Yeah,
and that
I know. I can see it's interesting.
Basically, to answer your question, both sectors are eliminated. Both sectors disappear because it's an open access society.
Like an open source.
It's an open source world. So therefore, direct democracy. So we have a representative democracy, which is basically, it preserves power. It's an elitist system. We hire people that say they're going to do something. They can be in power for years. They never do anything. Yeah, you can vote them out. Then you'll probably just get somebody else that will do their own thing again. We need, through technological means now, we can have a direct democracy that can not only design the goods we want.
Participatory democracy.
The government will probably fade into obscurity as we know it, because what is the point of the government really? It's there to manage the inefficiencies of the economic model in a way that the private sector, as you put it, can't.
So we could have a world that would be doing away with both.
Yes. The main instrument of governance is the system that everyone accesses. And that
again, the model is open source. And
absolutely.
You're thinking,
in every regard.
And that's beginning to resonate certainly among the young, isn't it? And probably the largest society too.
Usually, just with respect to programs.
That's an important metaphor, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it resonates with synergy.
It's utterly synergetic.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
You remember Fuller often talked about how if you just gave people the time to actually think creatively, remove them from the specialization, remove them from the monotony of labor and from money, it's just for survival. Give them the time, and the potential of those human beings could be tremendous. And in this type of approach, this open source global approach, sharing of ideas, being creative. And so you invent something, I go online, I see what you've invented, and I say, I want to contribute to that because I have a background in that type of development. And then we share ideas. And you can create, and I don't want to jump too far ahead because I know we're running out of time, but with the advancement of nanotechnology, 3D printing, we don't need the means of production to be owned by anybody. Everyone can own the means of production. And just like you have a printer on your home computer, you're owning a little means of production, right? And you create automated systems in enormous factories, which they'll get smaller and smaller over time because there'll be more modular robotics, there'll be more fluidity to the changing of how you can do it.
Ephemeralization,
precisely,
again, writ large.
Exactly. And then you have literally a society that's controlling itself in a democratized way without anyone having power over anyone else.
And people being able to realize their full potential,
and
that
they
being encouraged collectively by the whole society.
Absolutely.
Rather than,
people would be honored for their contribution, not with money, but the fact that, hey, John just solved this problem that we've been working on for a long time. Let's applaud him. We're not going to pay him. We're not going to give him anything.
Sounds like a gigantic jam session with really good musicians.
That's right. It's an
Is that a metaphor that might work or something?
Order out of chaos, right? But it'd be, I think I sent you the lecture that I talked about.
Yeah, I did. I listened to that. It was overseas somewhere in Europe.
It was in Berlin,
Yeah, it was good.
But if anyone listening wants to go to...
well, all of that would add up to a thing where you could get hours out of education or learning and everything, and you get away from... They can divide and conquer the intellectual community. It's all specialized. So you get more systems thinking, more autodidactic systems thinking, and it can be distributed and educated in an autodidactic, cybernetically enhanced way. And if there's one example that could be used to encourage many of the people who want to go along that course, it would be this film. It's called The Zeitgeist.
Well, the Zeitgeist, the movie was the first one.
Yeah, no, but the
Zeitgeist film series.
The work of Peter Joseph and the Zeitgeist movement that you've been talking about here. Thanks a lot for doing it.
Thank you, Harold.
Great pleasure meeting you. Let's stay in touch by all means.
Love to come back.
Your pleasure to have his perceptions. We invite you to tune in. We'll come back again tomorrow on Conversations. And once again, welcome back to your homestead of New York. And LJ is good too also.
Yeah.
Thanks for you. We'll come back again tomorrow. Okay.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. We just touched the surface of a very big subject.
Well, next time maybe I...